Meeting started. So Fran, can we do roll call, please?
We can. Village of Schaumburg,
Here.
Village of Bensonville,
Here.
Village of City of Des Plaines,
Here.
City of Elmhurst,
Here.
the Village of Harwood Heights,
Here.
Village of Niles,
Here.
City of Park Ridge,
Here.
Village of River Grove,
Here.
Village of Schiller Park,
Here.
the City of Wooddale,
Here.
and the Chicago Ward 39.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Perfect. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our February 24th, 2022. Is there a motion?
I'll move we approve.
Second by Schiller Park.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Another roll call, please, Fran.
Okay, Schaumburg,
Yes.
Bensonville,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
Wooddale,
Yes.
Ward 39.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. So before we jump in to kind of the heart of the meeting, I just want to give everyone a little bit of a reminder about the goals of today's meeting. So you'll notice the agenda is structured a little bit differently. We're going to continue to have ONCC member comments where ONCC members who are not a part of Fly Quiet can provide their input in advance of our discussion. Next on the agenda will be ONCC Fly Quiet Committee non-voting member comments. So for those consultants and technical advisors who've been a part of this process, we want to give you all an opportunity to kind of share your final thoughts in advance of us having our preferred alternative discussion. And then we are going to jump into the selection of the preferred Fly Quiet alternative, and that discussion will be focused for voting members of the committee only. You know, today we're going to get an overview from Landerman Brown on kind of what the discussion has done in terms of modifying the alternatives. The goal will be, if the conversation supports it, to select a preferred alternative. We can get into that a little bit more, but I just wanted to give everyone an overview of the different structure of today's meeting. So with that, we're going to move on to ONCC member comments. So is Frank with us today?
Karen, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, as someone who's attended most of the Fly Quiet meetings, and it looks like you're going to do a vote today, the Village of Norwich just wants to go on the record in support of alternative H. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Brian. Any other ONCC member comments?
Yes, the Village of Glenview.
Okay, Michelle?
The Village of Glenview supports the modified alternative B, as we feel it gives the best dispersion for all communities, is more simple with less weeks in the rotation. It would be easier to explain to our residents for future expectations regarding nighttime flights.
Great, thank you so much for your feedback today. Anybody else who are ONCC members? Okay, seeing none, then we are going to move on to our Fly Quiet non-voting members. So Dan, I know you're with us today. Would you like to share your thoughts this morning?
Thank you, Karen. This feels like the last day of summer camp here, that only it's lasted for 5 years.
Right.
So I'll do best to keep this under my summary under 3 minutes. I guess this really isn't a vote we would have predicted 5 years ago, that there's 2 alternatives that remain, both with consecutive impacts, which was a key criteria we understand was to be avoided, and that this just isn't left to possibility, but probable, in that they're both structural to the rotation. So really the choice is, you know, how much unpredictability and consecutive impacts you're willing to give residents. With alternative B, that's 50% of the schedule. Alternative H, that's 75%. And so for B, that obviously equates to 3 out of every 6 weeks. H is 3 out of every 4. And so I would hope the committee would keep in mind that the lived experience of the residents isn't on that sheet of paper. It's dictated by wind pilot requests and something we haven't discussed yet, which is airfield maintenance. And what's going to be simplest for residents to understand is if they do receive noise one week, they don't receive it the next or the week after. So I think in the argument towards simplicity, would argue the simplest thing for residents to understand would be that that's been avoided. So it's very difficult to make a recommendation today, considering we've advocated throughout this process to avoid consecutive impacts and feel both fall short of residents' expectations, the distinction only being by how much. But again, I guess the distinction we can make is alternative B offers consecutive impacts 3 out of every 6 weeks. Alternative H is 3 out of every 4 weeks. So do what you will with those percentages and probability. I appreciate everybody's input. And thank you, Karen, in particular, for giving us the opportunity, and Ryan also for being camp counselor for the last 5 years here. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your comments this morning. Cynthia?
Morning, Karen, and thanks for the opportunity to deliver SOC's recommendation. I would ask that the letter be attached to the minutes because we are being limited to time here, and there's just a lot to consolidate over the last 5 years of the committee's work. SOC has consistently advocated for the fairest distribution of the slightest noise possible for Fly Quiet 21. We believe runway utilization is the most effective method to bring noise relief to residents, and parity in the number of operations on all runways is both the preferred and fairest outcome. Short crosswind and long parallel runways require strategies to overcome the nightly operational demands for long runways. We believe alternative H provides the best strategy to overcome the need for those long runways in every week of the rotation schedule. We also encourage the committee to look to data and history to inform their action today and ultimately the action after the FAA reevaluates evaluates the Fly Quiet alternatives that you forward today. And runway rotation programs to date have demonstrated that 40 to 45% of operations will still use long runways even in the crosswind runway weeks. This makes any level of meaningful relief more challenging to provide to long runway communities. We believe alternative H provides the most relief to all populations, but still results in overburdening the long parallel runways. And by using the percentages of performance of previous programs, Dr. Tranny estimates that in alternative H, 34 to 36% of the operations will fall on north and south long parallels, and 28 to 32% of the operations will fall on the northeast southwest short crosswind parallels. Alternative B, in contrast, relies 38 to 40.5% on north and south long parallels, and 19 to 24% of the operations are expected on the crosswind parallels. So alternative H provides the most relief to all communities involved, and we believe is the fairest alternative to move forward. Headings is a separate issue. They offer a second noise distribution opportunity. However, headings are a much less effective tool at delivering relief due to variance in each aircraft's performance to the assigned heading, the reduction in climb rate while turning, which increases the noise level generated by the departure, and increases the time of exposure of the departure to those communities beneath the turning aircraft. So for all those reasons above, SOC has consistently recommended that headings should not exceed 20 degrees due to the diminishing returns. Another reason we think that the committee should forward more than, and I haven't really introduced that, but we think the committee should forward 6 alternatives to the FAA for evaluation. Last time we forwarded 1 alternative for evaluation. After being lobbied, the FAA decided to look at 2 other revised alternatives. Our preferred alternative had 50% of the scheduled operations on the crosswinds. The 2 alternatives had 33 and 40% scheduled participation on the crosswinds. It should be noted that the south parallel runways in all 3 conditions that the FAA evaluated carried the lion's share of the burden at 52%, 55%, and 53% of the operations in that those alternatives. So we recommend a similar evaluation this time, in which the preferred alternative is alternative H with headings limited to 20 degrees. The preferred alternative H3 with adopted headings, which is what the committee distributed, and then a third alternative that just limits the heavies to 10-degree turns, an attempt to address those aircraft that we think are most likely to wake people from their sleep in the nighttime hours. Alternative B should also be evaluated in the same 3 conditions, with headings limited to 20 degrees, with adopted headings, and with those heavy aircraft limited to 10 degrees. It should be noted that it's very easy for the FAA, that the lion's share of the work to evaluate headings or alternatives is done with the first analysis. So enabled to evaluate variation in headings or variation in runway loadings is a very easy modification for them in AEDT, and would provide valuable data to this committee to really decide the fairest runway operation balanced program with the smallest noise footprint. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Ron.
Yeah, I think, as everyone knows, there's no easy answer when it comes to trying to solve aircraft noise concerns. And we're seeing that with the process that we've gone through here, with the communities wanting something different, a lot of them. The complexities of air traffic control and the safety and the operational limitations that they have, that we have to abide by. So I think what the committee should keep in mind as you try to decide the best way forward are a couple of things. One is simple is best, and it's not just because it's the easiest maybe to implement, but you also have to think about the communities around the airport and how you explain to the residents what the process is going to be, what they can expect. So the simpler you can keep that, the better it's going to be, and the more acceptance you're going to get from residents around the area. 2, I think the simpler you can keep it, the more likelihood you're going to have success for implementation with air traffic control versus something that you might try to implement that would be a little more complicated. So I think those 2 are the main things. The third thing to keep in mind too is that this isn't permanent. This isn't forever. That's not the way aircraft noise works. This is for the foreseeable future, but it could change in the future if something else changes and requires the committee to come back together at some point, or a committee to come back together and decide that something different may need to be done. So with that, I think alternative B makes the most sense, because it flips between parallel and diagonals from week to week. So it's consistent, it provides some predictability for the communities, and it also prevents at least in the primary configurations, consecutive impacts, which is a big ordeal, I think, for most residents. If they have noise 1 week from departures, they don't want noise the next week from arrivals, because there will be some portion of that population that will be impacted by both of the operations. So alternative B does that probably the best between the two alternatives that are out there. I would encourage the committee to select your preferred alternative. That's the way the process works. The FAA wants you to select what you want to be implemented, and then they will review it and determine what kind of impacts are from that and how those impacts can be mitigated. Yes, they will look at some other alternatives as well, but the FAA is not going to have you submit multiple opportunities or multiple alternatives, and they're not going to go through and then analyze all of them and then give you all the data back and say, here, you make your choice. That's not the way the process works. So the FAA wants you to predict and put forth what your preferred alternative is, how you want to move forward, and then they will analyze that. And then, like I said, tell you what the concerns are and how to mitigate those concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. I do just want to take a minute and thank Dan and Cynthia and Ron for being such great participants throughout this whole process. I think that your contributions have definitely improved our discussions. I think it's helped educate all of us. Your perspectives have been very valuable. And so thank you so much for everything that you've brought to the table over these last few years. Certainly you get a lot of the credit for getting us to this point. And today also appreciated your feedback as we head into these discussions. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan as we kick off our discussion on the different alternatives. The goal today is to advance a preferred alternative. I would appreciate all of you taking the time as we go through our discussion to articulate any questions that you have. If you have an alternative that you know you are supporting, the more information you can share as to why you have a preferred alternative, whether it's things you like about that alternative or concerns you have about the other alternatives, that's all going to just help us advance that forward, both to the full Oncc Commission as well as through the FAA process. So the more you can tie back your comments to the criteria that we established, I think the better our package is going to look for the FAA. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Actually, those comments were very helpful, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail, the process where we're at, what the plan is as far as submitting the new Fly Quiet program package to the FAA. So let me pull up the slide deck for today. As usual, I want to kind of touch base, as I said, on where we're at with the process. We are currently still reviewing and revising alternatives with the intent of coming to a consensus, this committee, as to what they would like to see in a new Fly Quiet program. Once the committee is ready to make their recommendation, the full Oncc will then vote to approve and request that the CDA in turn package a submittal to the FAA for their review. This committee has been working diligently for many years now. Actually, this may come as a bit of a surprise, but we've been working together here on this topic for 7 years, and today is the 144th meeting on Fly Quiet. And so this has been a very thorough and robust discussion. Everyone has been given an opportunity to provide their opinions and feedback. And so this has been one of the most kind of comprehensive community and airport related working together process that, I think we've ever seen in the industry. It's pretty impressive. And so when the CDA actually goes to package the final submittal, we have been documenting all of these meetings all along the way over the 7-year process. And the submittal will contain the entire narrative of how this committee got to where you are today and got to where ultimately, hopefully, you'll have your final recommendation. And that will include all of the alternatives that this committee looked at. And so the notion that you're only going to be submitting one alternative isn't quite the case. You're going to be submitting what you want the program to be, along with documenting all the process of how you got there, including all the alternatives that you considered, looked at, the reasons why you preferred some things, some categories or changes over others. And so it really has the full story in there with the intent. So when the FAA, as Ron stated, when they go to do their review, they're really charged with looking at the environmental impacts of this proposed action. One of the things they have to consider are there other alternatives to this proposed action? And our intent is to show that that work has pretty much been done. We've looked at all the alternatives. Here they are. And here's the reason why the communities prefer this particular alternative. And so I hope this kind of clarifies that the intent is to have a very comprehensive and robust submittal to the FAA for their review. And show that, you know, the majority, how much work this committee has done over the last 7 years. Now, Cynthia and SOC did mention the regulatory review process for IFQ. The FAA did request that the CDA submit additional alternatives that closely aligned with what the ONCC had intended for those interim flight quiet runway rotation program. The purpose of that was to have additional alternatives that would reduce the use of the crosswinds in the event that there was environmental impacts, significant environmental impacts caused by those operations. In the end, there weren't any, and so those alternatives were not needed. But there was absolutely no lobbying from outside sources to the FAA or any other community to reduce the schedule in any way. That was just to kind of make sure the process went through quickly. And if there was a snag, we had something in place as a backup. But the suggestion that there was lobbying is absolutely false. And I want to make sure that's clear that the review process was something that was not influenced by outside sources. Okay, so again, the intent today is to get closer to that committee recommendation. We still have some work to do and kind of tie up some loose ends, which we'll talk about today as well. And then we look towards a full ONCC commission vote to submit that to the CDA and request that they submit a program for review. So we are currently, again, here at our crossroads. We've looked back at both alternatives B and H, the two alternatives this committee has chosen to move forward with. We've made all our tweaks and revisions to both alternatives to get them as close to what we're looking for as we can. And now we're looking to see which one of these we want to move forward with and discuss some of these other topics, procedural and implementation topics that we would want to include in the final request. Now, all of those items, I think, are applicable to any of these alternatives as they stand right now. These are kind of the big structure pieces that we've been talking about here, these four kind of big elements here. And so once we decide which alternative incorporates these elements in a way that best meets the criteria this committee has established, then we'll add on all these other procedural and implementation topics that shouldn't really influence any of the first four before we submit. So let's talk about our alternatives. And in previous meetings, we talked about, I did quite a bit of a walkthrough of how we got to each of the alternatives as they stand right now. Alternatives B3 and H3 are, for lack of a better word, your final best alternatives that have been broken out. And I'm sorry, can everyone make sure, I'm getting a lot of overtalk. Can everyone make sure you're muted if you're in the meeting, please? Thank you. So we have the 6 alternatives. I mentioned how we broke out each alternative into 3 iterations based on significant or specific categories that changed between the 3 as we moved along our revisions. And so today, to kind of get you to get a better comparison of the alternatives as they are, I'm going to talk about today the significant differences between these alternatives. So first, let's look at alternative B. As I mentioned in previous meetings, we're referring to alternative B1 as the initial alternative B that was initially advanced for consideration. This alternative consisted of those 6 configurations, Q, M, L, P, O, and I, that were scheduled and rotated over a 12-week period. It included that north-south airfield split concept with vector departure procedures as opposed to RNAV, which this committee decided was not interested in moving forward with at this time. Consisted of a split of the east-west runways for 8 weeks and crosswind for 4 weeks. We then made a change to the schedule of the configurations over that 12-week period as to help to avoid any instances of potential consecutive impacts. And so we made that change to the iteration of the configurations P and O. And so that's our alternative B2. So the only change there really is that schedule of P and O versus O and P. And then we made further changes on departure procedures, headings, with the significant change of including a vector heading with a turn for runways 4 left and 22 left. And so the major difference here now is with alternative B3, it incorporates all these elements with this specific vector with a turn that really calls it out as a different alternative. So alternative B3 is our 6 configurations rotated over 12 weeks with the north and south airfield split. It includes vector heading departure procedures 2 for each of our departure designated departure runways, except for 4 left and 22 left. Those have those very unique vector headings with a turn. The 8 weeks for east-west runways in the schedule and 4 weeks for crosswind runways. Next is alternative H. So the same thing, we advanced alternative H for further consideration. Alternative H1 was that initial alternative H before we made any changes. It consisted of the same 6 configurations as alternative B, except it scheduled the 6 alternatives over 16 weeks, incorporating 4 additional weeks for the crosswind runways. And so it also had the same north-south airfield split concept using vector headings only for the departure procedures, 8 weeks of east-west runways, and 8 weeks of crosswind runways. Like alternative B, we made a change to how those 6 configurations were scheduled to help avoid any potential issues of consecutive impacts. And so we have alternative H2, which represents that change in the schedule of configurations. And then alternative H3 includes that schedule change as well as all of the departure procedure heading changes that we made, including the specific 4 left and 22 left vector headings with a turn, the same as alternative B. And east-west runways scheduled again 8 weeks, crosswind runways scheduled 8 weeks throughout that 16-week rotation schedule. Now, in the end, we have alternative H3 and B3. And our last meeting, we pretty much, as far as the departure procedures, ended up with 2 alternatives that were almost exactly the same, except for a few specific differences. And so if we look at both the specific differences of alternative H3 and B3, the first being H3, again, is scheduled over 16 weeks, those same 6 configurations, while B3 is only 12 weeks. They both incorporate that concept of the north-south airfield, where we attempt to isolate operations from week to week to either the north airfield or the south airfield, or using our crosswinds. Both alternatives have vector-only departure procedures for all the runways. All the runways have the same vector headings at this time, and both alternatives utilize a vector heading with a turn for runways 4 left and 22 left. Both alternatives incorporate 8 weeks in the schedule for your east-west runways. However, again, the big difference between alternative H and B, alternative H3 and B3, is that H3 has 8 weeks of crosswind runway utilization versus 4 weeks and for alternative B3. And so another way to look at this is if we look at how those specific scheduled runways are distributed in each alternative. You can see in alternative B3, if we're looking at those kind of 3 airfields, if it were, crosswind, north airfield, south airfield, alternative B3 schedules them all equally throughout the rotation schedule. 33% of the schedule has each airfield in use. When we look at alternative H3, again, they doubled up on the crosswind utilization. And so in the schedule, 50% of the weeks utilize crosswind runways and only 25% north airfield, 25% south airfield. And so the big difference between these 2 alternatives is that scheduled runway distribution. Now, again, this is not, make sure everyone understands, this is not percentage of operations that will be handled on each of these runways. This is only the percentage of the schedule that each of these runways would be intended to be used. And so we have these overview pictures of both alternatives B3 and H3. And if I show you both, click back and forth, you can see they are exactly the same. The only difference is the number of weeks in the schedule and how many times each of those configurations comes up in the schedule. Okay. And so at this point, it's up to the committee to deliberate of these alternatives, which one of these alternatives, in your opinion, best meets the criteria that the committee established for developing this new program. I think, as I mentioned earlier, in a way, they all meet the criteria, but some of them meet some of these criteria better than others. And it's the committee's job to decide, come to a consensus as which one of those would be the preferred alternative that meets the criteria the best. And I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, the goal now is to discuss of the 6 alternatives that we have developed through this refinement process. We are looking to identify which alternative is preferred to advance to the full ONCC. And so we're going to use our standard format of giving everyone an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions. So we'll go through, typically we limit it to twice. We'll obviously go through as many times as is needed to make sure that we're able to have a fully vetted discussion. So with that, we will start with Bensonville.
And my first question is more of a point of order. Going back to SOC's request of trying to advance all 6 alternatives, can we clarify, is that possible or is that not possible?
Well, if I understand the request, their alternatives aren't representative of the alternatives that you have in place now. They had additional changes, so the committee would have to go back and accept those changes and representative of those alternatives. And as I mentioned earlier, the overall package is going to include a number of quote unquote alternatives. It's what we want the committee to say is this is the alternative we want to see in a program. This is the program we want. We'll have all of those other alternatives, quote unquote, in the package, but we really want this committee to say this is the one we want to see in a flight quiet program.
And Madam Chair, that matches up with your objective today, which is to select one. Is that right? And only one?
Correct. I think to Ryan's point, the FAA is going to get the full package of all the work that this committee has done. And, they've been engaged in this process in the background, so they're aware. And I think they've seen how these alternatives have evolved based on the discussion and the criteria. But, I don't want to speak for the FAA, but if the roles were reversed, the FAA is looking to us to, identify what we think best accomplishes the goals of this committee and the ONCC. And then they will do their environmental analysis to identify if there are any concerns with that. I don't think the FAA is going to do that analysis on all of the alternatives and then come back and say which one they think is best. I think Ryan made that point earlier. It's our job to advance based on our criteria. It's our process. So what's our preference? And then we'll see how that environmental process plays out. But I also think that over the course of these 144 meetings, we've told the story, we've given our rationale, and if there are questions or concerns, I'm sure the FAA will work with the CDA and the ONCC to clarify those. So,
okay, no, I appreciate that. That clarifies what we're trying to achieve today. First off, I want to say that, it looks like I'm going to have to head out this vote. I know we're not voting now, but there's an enormous weight on my shoulders with that. And the levity of it is not lost on me. We've been working at this for 7 years, which is incredible. Been doing this my whole career. Never have I worked on something with so many dedicated individuals, on something so complex for so long. So I want to thank everybody on the team for doing that, because it has been a team effort to get to this point. When we look at this, we go back to 7 years, and one of those things that we were looking at was what would success look like, and that would be avoiding consecutive impacts, making something that was simple to explain to our residents. Try as we might with H, and I do appreciate the analysis where we're trying to achieve more equality. It just is not achieving those initial matrix questions that we set out to do. And I understand Dan got in the weeds and saying both have their flaws. I appreciate that. But in the simplest form, I think we understand what consecutive impacts is, and B avoids those for the most part. I do want to make sure that when we do this final vote, that we also consider procedures. I know we keep kicking it down the can down the road. That east-west 50-50 balance and accepting the headwind, I know we keep saying we'll add that. I want to make sure that we put that asterisk in there. And I know that Karen assured me this morning that would be coming. When it comes down to it, it's the status quo is not working for my residents. Fly quiet as it currently exists is broken. It doesn't work. It is 365 days of aircraft over my residence, which is unacceptable. As many of you received calls from me this week, I tried to get a feel for where everybody was in the voting tally, and it's clear that one of these alternatives is going to be accepted more by this committee, let alone by the ONCC. So we need to look at what is the quickest way to start achieving relief for our residents. Both of these alternatives will lend some relief to my residents, not the relief that we were looking for at the beginning of it, but some relief nonetheless. For that reason, the Village of Wentzville is going to go with the alternative that supports the objectives we set out for, as well as one that has the support of the full ONCC membership, as well as the support of this committee, which is alternative B. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Evan, just to clarify, is there between 1, 2, and 3, is there a B that you all prefer?
B is revised, so B3.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Chicago Ward 39.
Yeah, one quick question in regards to the whole overall process. When we submit this to the full commission, are we expecting that to be
1 year?
Somewhat of a rubber stamp, or do we expect a robust discussion at that level that might last more than one meeting? I'm just curious as to what we anticipate going forward when we make this recommendation. Any comments there?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and I apologize I didn't address that before we started this discussion. And Ryan can certainly jump in. So the way that I envision this is that, you know, today we'll identify a preferred alternative, and at that point, this committee will continue our work on those procedural and implementation topics. So to Evan's point, we have items that were not alternative specific that we know we still need to address, things like altitude, construction impacts, tailwinds. And so this committee will continue our work on those items. At the same time, we are going to be doing outreach to the full ONCC commission to get those members who've not been participating closely in this process up to speed. My goal is to establish some meetings that will be based on kind of the geographic quadrants around the airport, where we will invite ONCC members and the Fly Quiet Committee members who represent those areas to a drop-in meeting where we can provide an overview of the process to date, the vote that was taken on the preferred alternative, and kind of what's coming up next. The goal being that in a few months, when we do have our procedural and implementation topics voted on and a full package ready to go to the commission, our ONCC membership has had an opportunity to be educated and understand and ask any questions, so that you know, we go into that meeting with a prepared discussion. I'm not saying we'll necessarily get it done in one meeting, but my goal is that we don't go to the full ONCC and everyone says, wait, we don't know what's going on, or we haven't had an opportunity. So that's kind of the roadmap that I have for the next part of this process.
Okay, having said that, I think Ward 39, we would upfront just support alternative B3. I want to say that this has been a very rigorous process. I've been very impressed with everybody's contributions and insights, as well as the very competent leadership we've had in this whole matter. Bottom line boils down to, again, the things that we've all talked about: the simplicity, dispersion, and a decent degree of predictability as far as that goes. I think we've also addressed the concerns of the individual communities around the airport with the tweaks that we've put in here, and I feel really happy with all of this. And I think again, alternative B3 is the way to go.
Great, thank you for your comments. Displays.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We support B3 for some of the reasons that have already been mentioned. I think it's best on consecutive impacts. I think it's the fairest alternative, and I think it's improved substantially with our work, so that the B3 that we now support is even much better than the B1 that we started with. So we're very appreciative of the process. I think everybody has worked hard, but at the end of the day, B3 seems the best to us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Elmhurst?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank everyone on the committee for their work. Brian throwing out that data point of 144 meetings is truly mind-boggling, and everyone's commitment during that time is very much appreciated. It's a sharp committee. We continue to work well together under our previous chair, Joe Annunzio, and then now Karen Robles. So we have these two different alternatives that we're looking at. I'm going to talk to B3 being the final iteration on the B alternative, and then the H3, the final iteration on that one. And I think you really have to look at the primary configuration. The other design criteria, the secondary configurations, they mirror the primary configurations, both in B and H, and also the departures we reviewed those and iterated on those and really came up with the same plan for B&H in terms of departures. And those were very good discussions to try to get where we did have some control in the routes that our aircraft took on the departures, that we don't have that influence on the landings. So we came up with a good solution for both B&H and the long runways as well. There's equal use of those. However, and if you look at B versus H, the B long runway usage is a nice variation in terms of the primary configuration to alternate every other week, whereas H is not. So in terms of there's other issues we're going to talk to later, construction being one of them, and it's my belief that construction is going to impact the runways fairly evenly. So you may have a disruption in the rotation, the planned rotation due to construction, but that should equal out over time. And I think that the alternative B3 is clearly a better solution, meeting our committee's criteria of non-consecutive impacts, but even more so simplicity and fairness. The B configuration or alternative, we have north-south diagonal in west flow, and then north-south diagonal east flow. That's very easy explanation to the public. They know they're going to be in the rotation once out of every 3 weeks, and in one of those series it's going to be a arrival, and then the other it will be a departure. I think that I do understand some of the concern with the long runways. I know that we really need to continue to drive compliance with that, so that the utilization of the long runways is not veering from what's in the rotation plan, just on a discretionary basis. And that's been mentioned by Evan and some others as well, to continue to drive compliance, to only use those long runways when it's absolutely necessary. And again, I want to mention that the long runways tend to be more needed on takeoffs. You got heavier aircraft, fully fueled, needing more runway versus arrivals. And we know that the departures are 1/3 of the nighttime operations versus the landings. I think SOC had shared some information in terms of their analysis. I think some of that data from IFQ might be a little old. We are progressing. We have new methods, we have new technologies in terms of aircraft control and the performance of aircraft to continue to be able to better comply with what's in the rotation plan. Again, I appreciate everyone's efforts. I appreciate our consultants that they provided a lot of good support and a lot of data and background information throughout this analysis. But I do think Elmhurst does favor alternative B3 as the simple, fair, just the solution that makes more sense moving forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you for your comments. Harwood Heights.
Hi, thank you. Well, from day one, I know that I was always in favor of a split runway as a split airport as opposed to the utilizing the entire airport. And I think many of us feel the same. I too want to thank the entire committee and our leadership by Joe and Karen and Bob. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot, just short of being a pilot, just kidding. But I do want to say, in looking at both alternatives, is that both reduce the impact, of course, on the east-west runways, but both both show more equity in using the diagonals. If we look at what we have now, each alternative is better than what we have now, which is nothing. So I think people are looking forward to us to finally make a decision to get them some relief in the evening hours. And I'm sure all of us hear the same thing. I know that the headings for both aid in the distribution of eliminating that constant noise in the same areas. So B or H, when we utilize one runway and the heading is different than when we utilize that runway on another week and it's different, I think that helps disperse some of the noise. And I like the fact that we're keeping 1 week to the north, 1 week to the south. I do agree with many prior to me. I think Ron Seymour mentioned about that it's this B3. It's simple, easy to understand. I think it's easy to implement. Again, what we decide on does not have to be permanent. I think we're here in the future to help tweak situations as we have to do with the slopes and a number of other issues. I do feel that both offer a less consecutive impacts in the arrivals and departures. So with that said, it was a tough decision, but I do think that B3 offers the easiest, simplest. Both are providing distribution, more equity. And of course, we know the diagonals. They're not always going to use the diagonals. They're going to use the north and south runways, but those north and south are divided to north and south. So that'll help us out there. And so I'm going with B3.
Great, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Niles.
First, I'd like to thank everybody for participating in Fly Quiet. It has been a long time. It seems like as I look out the window, there's a giant airplane flying right over my head. Well, anyway, I'm sorry. It was a learning experience. I was just doing some calculating. We talked about 144 meetings. If we would have turned this into a class, we would have been done in less than a year. Because you got to remember, we only got together once a month, and sometimes we didn't even do that. Sometimes we skipped meetings. So having said that, yes, it was a long process, but I think it was a process we had to do because we couldn't make the decisions we're making right now unless we had spent the time and effort learning. So yes, it was a long time, and it was an amazing journey, and I think it was a journey we all had to take to be able to do what we're doing today. To further what the mayor of Howard Heights was saying, after this committee has done its work and something goes to the full membership for a vote, it will become dormant. And at that point, the tech committee will begin to monitor, I believe, what's going on with Fly Quiet in real time when it's finally implemented. Having said that, we're not going to take Fly Quiet committee out of the bylaws. So if it looks like there's an issue that needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at, it's just a matter of scheduling another meeting for Fly Quiet so it can be discussed and looked at. So don't think that this is the end of the line. The only thing I will say is that whatever we decide, we're going to have to live with because this is our program, ultimately. But it's not the end of the line at all. I mean, there's going to be tweaks. There's going to have to be tweaks because you can't do this without finding out new information as time goes on, real-time information. As a personal comment, when I left the chairmanship of Fly Quiet committee, I never thought that I would have to be chairman of a Fly Quiet committee with the whole committee with a whole group. And if, in effect, for a meeting or two, that's what might happen when we finally take a vote and discussion starts. But I'm ready for that. I'd like to thank Karen for picking it up where I left off. She did some heavy lifting, and she did it as well as anybody could have done. I want to thank her for that. And having what everybody else has said, I have nothing other than we're going to be voting for B3. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Ernie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I will echo everyone else's comments. A big thank you first, Karen, to you as chair, and Joe as chair before that, and now in your role as chair of the General Commission. Your work has been arduous, and it's appreciated, and that goes for all the committee members as well as those non-voting members who have graced us with their comments. All of it is appreciated. I want to start out real quickly. I'll be very brief. I just want to make sure that I understand correctly that there is some certainty here that even if we pass an alternative on today to the full commission for its tacit approval, that this work continues, and a number of the add-ons, not the least of which is issues related to residential sound insulation, that before submission from CDA to the FAA ever takes place and ultimately implementation, that we have the opportunity to add some of those covenants on. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are. So I will put this out there for all of you. You'll see on the agenda that the next item, not for today's meeting, but for future meetings, are those like implementation and procedural topics. If you have items that you want to make sure this committee discusses, please send them to myself and Maura and Ryan, and we will add them to that list. I think when I talked to Landon Brown last, there were about 20 items, some of greater magnitude than others, but please get us those items. We want to make sure we cover all of that. We just thought it was best to sort of separate the alternative discussion versus those procedural topics that we're going to apply to whatever program we put together. So yes, send those to us. We will happily add them to the list, and we will have robust discussion on those in our next couple of meetings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that clarification. I would encourage all the committee members to do exactly that. Those items will be critically important going forward before any type of new fly quiet ever gets implemented. Secondly, and I won't bore everyone with this, you've all heard my position on crosswind utilization in terms of the rotation. I still believe they add a level of complexity and uncertainty by forcing the use of a long parallel east-west runway, no matter the utilization of placing the crosswinds. But having said that, I want to continue to push this ball forward to the goal line, which I believe is to pass the alternative on today in representation of not only Park Ridge, but of the Northeast quadrant of O'Hare. We will be looking to B3 as the alternative to push forward at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield any further time.
Thank you. Dennis?
I also would like to thank everybody. This group has basically all been together since the start. There's been a few of us that got changed out, but other than that, we've gone through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, confusing days, non-confusing days. I really like to thank my friend Ryan for all he's done to help us understand the ramifications of what would happen if we do this or do that. I'd like to put my support behind B3 because I feel H3 has too many alternatives and is too likely to cause consecutive weeks where they're not wanted. So I'm going to say River Grove is voting for B3. Thanks again, Karen. You've done a marvelous job. Joe, as always, you do a great job. And my many years on the Oncc is this is probably the most important thing I've done. So on to the rest of you.
Thanks, Dennis. Schiller Park?
Thanks, Karen. Yes, I think the leadership here has been done a very good job. It's taught me a lot. I came as a novice. I still am a novice, but I've learned a lot from the leadership and all the other villages around. Okay, it's a tough call. We actually spent the last couple of days, myself, the mayor, and some other people looking at this, how it's going to affect Schiller Park. And again, I've always said Schiller Park is always going to be in the mix of it. Not much we can do to help Schiller Park, except try to keep it simple for the people so they understand what we've been doing for all these weeks. So Schiller Park's going to go with B3. I can see both sides of this H3 and B3. I see good and bad for Schiller Park. I see good and bad for the surrounding towns around the airport. But I'm hoping that I've heard Ryan say that a lot of alternatives are going to be submitted. And I'm hoping that the FAA looks at B3 and H3 a little bit more than all the others and let them with their expertise figure out which is best for all the towns. But Schiller Park will be going with B3. Thank you.
Thank you. Wooddale?
Well, apparently we're on an island. We've been consistent in saying that we do prefer H3. We would like to thank obviously all the experts and everybody that worked on this, but we'll continue to advocate for H3. But I would also note that B3 of all the alternatives that have been discussed, besides H3 is obviously a good option as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Schaumburg is going to be supporting alternative B3. I think everyone's comments today were very well stated. I think we all would have liked perfection, but I think we all know that we have to focus on progress. I think both B3 and H3 brought different benefits to the table, similar to what's been said. From our perspective, we were looking at limiting consecutive impacts to the greatest extent possible, and also keeping things simple so that implementation is successful and communication with our residents is effective. So for those reasons, we'll be supporting alternative B3. And so with that, we have gone through our entire list. I didn't hear any questions, but I do want to open things up if there are any fly quiet voting members who wanted to make any additional statements. I do want to make sure we provide that opportunity. So is there anyone who had anything else they wanted to add to today's discussion? Okay, seeing none. Ryan, I did get one question from a member of the public that I do think we can clarify. There were some comments today made about tweaking the plan, and I think the idea here is that whatever gets approved by the FAA, we're going to live with, but then similar to how we're addressing kind of original fly quiet and how it no longer works for the airport, if in the future, a few years into implementation, if changes needed to be made, that would be something that the Oncc could undertake, but it's not something as easy as like contacting air traffic control and making a modification. Is that correct?
Yes. What I will say is that we intend to be, moving forward with this program, setting it up so that Oncc and CDA and FAA are consistently talking and monitoring how things are going. And I think that within the realm of not making significant changes to the concept, tweaks can be made along the way as with anything else. So I don't think that we're looking at this as unchangeable, but there may be some things that, might be able to be tweaked along the way that the FAA would agree to without triggering a whole new environmental review. And that does happen quite a bit. These environmental reviews aren't supposed to, mean that this is only the thing you can do. It's just in general sense that the concept itself has these impacts, and here's what the recommended mitigations are. So to answer your question, yes, we foresee working with the FAA very closely, this group, Oncc working with the FAA and the communication back and forth, and making sure that the program still serves the need of what the concept you're looking for.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. I think the other piece that was mentioned today is that a lot of the work that's going to go on after a Fly Quiet program is approved and implemented is outreach and compliance. And I think to Joe's point, that's where the technical committee is going to come in terms of monitoring how the new Fly Quiet program is going, making sure we're working with our partners at the airport to make sure they understand the new program and are following those guidelines. So, you know, unfortunately, there's still work ahead once we get through this process, but all good things, and I think to the benefit of our communities. So with that, sorry, were there any other Fly Quiet committee members who wanted to make any final comments? Okay, seeing none, is there someone who would like to make a motion on a preferred alternative?
River Grove makes a motion to accept alternative B3.
Elmhurst seconds that.
Great, thank you. Any final discussion? Hearing none, Fran, can we do a roll call, please?
Schomburg,
Yes.
Bensonville,
Yes.
Displains,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Village of Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
Wooddale,
No.
Ward 39,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you all again for your hard work. Did start to feel a little bit like the Oscars today. Should I thank all the little people who made our vote today possible? But as I mentioned, moving on, we are going to be talking about those procedural and implementation topics. So please get those to Ryan, myself, and Maura so we can make sure to add them to our list. Our next meeting will be in person at a location to be determined. We're working out the logistics on that. It'll be April 26th at 9:30 a.m. We will make sure to notify all of you about that in-person location. And also just stay tuned. I'm going to be working with Maura to set up those dates. I'll be doing outreach to some of you so that hopefully as we do outreach to the full Oncc, some of you can join us at those meetings since you all are the representatives for those geographic areas on this committee. And with that, I'm moving on to comments from the audience. Is there anyone? Oh, Suzanne.
I just want to say hi, everyone. And again, like all of you, I've been on this slog for, 6, 7, 8 years. It seems like longer. And I'm wondering now, are we all going to be part of a special alumni club? Are we going to be having reunions? And will I be expecting, balloon drop confetti or perhaps a flyover after today's meeting? So
It might not, the flyover might not be what you actually want, right?
okay. Well, just, that's all, not nothing, just.
Yep. Yes. Thank you so much. Any other audience comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Harwood Heights motions to adjourn.
Second.
All right, last roll call. Next time we'll get to just do this unanimously. Oh, you're muted, Fran.
Got it. Schomburg,
Yes.
Bensonville,
Yes.
Displains,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Village of Niles,
Yes.
City of Park Ridge.
Madam Chair, I think we should hold the celebration that Suzanne talked about at the burn pit at O'Hare. I think that would be pretty poignant for this. And Fran Parkridge votes yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
Wooddale,
Yes.
Ward 39.
Yes.
And Evan, did you second that motion to adjourn?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, we are adjourned. I will see you all in person in April. Stay tuned for a meeting location. And everyone who's someplace warm and tropical, enjoy.
By the way, St. Thomas votes yes.
All right, everybody have a good day.
Thanks all.
Ah.